Power Factor fans, I'm Rick, and as per usual, I am going to do a little match review of the Washington State IDPA Championship. The match, as usual, again, is run on the third weekend in August, and we've been hosting it at the club at Renton Fish and Game 11 of the last 12 years, I think. So we've got a little bit of experience with it. And in the past, I've done kind of previews of the stages, summaries of the stages, planning, how to plan a major match. I mean, I've done quite a few episodes about, about the topic. And this is going to be more of a standard match review. We're going to look at the stages, and I'll just talk about, how I approached them, how as a staff member we had interesting experiences with getting the stages vetted or not vetted in one case that we'll get into later. But the match was held third weekend in August, as we usually do. Our major sponsor, as has been the case the last couple of years, is Blade Tech, and we thank Blade Tech very much for being the title sponsor of the Washington State match. We had an interesting deal with our sponsor, Walther. We're very keen to get involved in the match, not just in the prize table sense, but getting actually involved in the match, either with a side stage or integrating a Walther pistol into one of the stages. And we're generally kind of reluctant to do pickup gun stages, just because I think you've got a situation, let's say, where a shooter is a revolver shooter. All they ever shoot is revolvers, and then you have a pickup gun stage with a semi-automatic pistol, and I think just kind of having people shoot a gun with which they're unfamiliar and then have their score depend on their ability to shoot this unfamiliar gun just is kind of inherently unfair. But then you could argue, well, but it's the same for everybody. And that phrase is actually used in the IDPA rulebook as not a good excuse to do something. That the same for everybody is not a good reason. So I've got that in the back of my mind. But the rulebook does explicitly allow pickup guns. So the Walther guys were really hot to do so. So we did a Walther pickup stage. It was kind of interesting that they sent a representative out to the match, an earlier match actually, and they were asking about things like, well, what kind of a gun should we bring? I mean, should we bring like a compact gun? I mean, if the stage revolves around, you're using your gun initially, and then you have to transition to this other gun. If that's like a backup gun, should we bring our smallest gun? And I was kind of more along the lines of, if you're hoping to sell pistols to IDPA shooters, bring the pistol that you make that is most appropriate for IDPA use, meaning high capacity 9mm with a 5-inch barrel, a gun that people are going to use as their competition gun. And they brought a pretty neat gun, kind of following on the episodes that we've been doing for the optics division in USPSA. The gun that the Walther guys brought out is called the Q5, and it's a big, just in terms of physical dimensions, it's a full-sized 9mm high-cap pistol, striker fired, I'm pretty sure, with the back of the slide milled out with a plate covering it that can be removed to mount an optic on it. So it's not only perfectly suitable as it is out of the box for an SSP gun, but if you are interested in the USPSA optics division, you might want to take a look at it. It's a pretty nice gun. I mean, I'm used to single action triggers, hammer fired single action guns, and so I'm just not a huge fan of striker fired guns. But if you're familiar with striker fired guns and you accept that they're the wave of the future, if not the wave of the present, check out the Walther Q5. It's a pretty nice gun. It has interchangeable back straps. It fits your hand pretty well. It can be made to fit your hand pretty well, and it performed perfectly at the match. I mean, everybody, 160 odd shooters, put 6 or 8 rounds through it at the match, and it ran fine. And it's nice. It's nice. I think it comes with a fiber optic front sight, and maybe in a future episode we'll be able to do a test of it. But anyway, thanks to Walther for providing the gun, and check out the Q5. So I usually give you a little rundown of my equipment that I shot at the match. It was an interesting year. If you've been following the show, you know that I was trying to get my Detonics Combat Master, an ultra compact 45, down below the IDPA legal weight limit for backup gun division, which is 29 ounces. And I had removed all of the heavy parts on the gun. I'd replaced them with metal, with plastic, aluminum, with rubber, you know, trying to get half an ounce here, half an ounce there. And what I was able to do is get the gun down to 29 ounces with no grips on it. And I told myself, well, you know, I could shoot the gun with no grips. You know, if it really came down, push came to shove, if I wanted to shoot a bug match, I could shoot a bug match with the gun if I took the grips off. And to test that theory, we had a classifier match. And I took the gun with no grips and shot in 4 divisions. The IDPA rulebook now allows you to shoot as many divisions as the legality of your equipment will allow. So by shooting a compact 29-ounce pistol, I was able to classify in backup gun. Because CCP division is just a slightly larger gun than backup gun, I was able to qualify in ESP division. Or in CCP, and then because CCP and ESP, the only difference is the size of the gun, and I'm shooting a tiny little gun, it's also legal for ESP, and because it's chambered in .45 auto, it's also legal for CDP. So by shooting a single action compact .45 that's bug legal, I was able to get 4 divisions in one run with my gripless Combat Master. And then, of course, backup gun's not allowed at our state championship. We haven't recognized backup gun in the last 2 years, and I knew we wouldn't be. So I thought, okay, I'll shoot the gun in CCP. And I devoted a couple of episodes to discussing how I was going to go about that. And I don't think I ever actually showed the final product. So here it is. Here's a Combat Master in CCP trim. What I did was I fitted an all-steel mainspring housing magwell from S&A, and then I cut down a set of full-size government grips. The factory Detonics grips leave the usual kind of beveled gap here between the magwell and the grip panel. So I made my own set of magwell grips by just cutting down a full-size set of 1911 grips and then re-drilling the screw hole. So it turned out pretty nice. I mean, it's amazing how much this little extra 1/4 of an inch that the magwell provides to the length of the butt really makes it quite a bit easier to hang on to. And then I also loaded some minor power factor loads, which I'd never done before. Even when I shoot the gun in bug, I've never downloaded it. And all I did was just substitute a 200 grain bullet for my usual 230 grain load. So out of the 3.5 inch barrel, I think I went 147 power factor. So minor, distinctly minor. The gun ran great. If you'll recall, last year the gun broke. A little piece of the slide chipped off, and I subsequently had that repaired. And so the gun ran fine. One thing that I did have to do is, because previously I'd always shot it just in its stock configuration of the frame and the grips, I'd added these plastic pads to the bottom to act as over travel stops, but then also as a little finger rest. Well, the problem, of course, when you add the magwell on there is the collar, this plastic collar, needed to be beveled on the edges so that it would not foul the magwell. So allow the mags to fit securely in the gun and lock in there. I had to spend a couple of hours with a Dremel and a sanding drum just applying that bevel to the that plastic collar. And now I have my nice finger rest. I have my nice over travel stop. And I was also surprised at how heavy the gun was. I couldn't get it down to 29 ounces, but by putting the metal mainspring housing and magwell on there, the weight went up to 36 ounces. So that's quite a considerable weight for such a little gun. And then I shot my usual holster gear, my fist kind of Avenger style holster, 3 mag pouches, I was using 7-round mags. Ideally, I'd like to use 8-round mags, but because that's what's allowed in CCP. But I've never found an 8-round mag that'll work in this gun, so we're limited to 7 rounds. I was not even thinking about really competition. I was just thinking about a gun that was legal that I would enjoy shooting, and so I did come up with that. Combat Master is, one of my favorite guns to shoot. So that was my gear. And then the staff shot on Friday, as we usually do, and some of the stages required more than a little bit of work. Ideally, really ideally, you want to have your stages vetted not only for legality, are they practical, is the stage clearance time appropriate, but I really would like to set them up and shoot them over the course of the year so that by the time the state match comes around, the stages are going to work because you've already shot them. And one of the problems with that kind of discourages us from doing that is the stages that we set up in the state match are often quite a bit more elaborate than what we do for our local club matches. And so setting them up just isn't, I won't say it's not practical, but we just have been discouraged from doing it, which requires a lot more of the vetting process taking place during the staff match. And the traditional way that we've done that is to have what we call the super squad, which is completely unlike the super squad you see in most major matches. And the super squad is the match director, in this case area coordinator, myself, and 1 or 2 other shooters, trying to get a cross-section of shooting skill and experience so that the opinions of everybody, when they're taken as a group, isn't just everybody who has similar skills agreeing, hey, this is a great stage. We had a master class shooter, marksman class shooters, so everybody has an opinion and a little bit different perspective, because what, of course, we're trying to do is come up with a stage that everybody can shoot, everybody can enjoy. So the vetting process requires the stages all be set up. They're all approved in terms of legality, round count, steel to paper ratio. I was just about to say target distances, but as we'll see as we go along, that didn't pan out exactly as decided. But the super squad started to shoot, got through the first couple of stages, but it turned into reshoot after reshoot after reshoot. I mean, it was 175 round match. I brought 250 rounds, and I thought I was going to run out of ammo because it was weird. I mean, we set the stages up, and I've reviewed them in paper form. I'd reviewed them after I saw them get set up. And we're getting ready to shoot this stage, and we realize, well, hold it, this isn't legal. This target needs to go over here. And it was just interesting that by the time we'd gotten through 3 stages, I think everybody in the super squad had reshot at least 1, if not all 3 of the stages, because somebody would shoot it and they'd go, oh, that you can't do that, so let's move this target. Okay, now I'll reshoot it, and it was getting to be kind of a drag, but I'm just going to go over the stages one at a time in order and just kind of discuss the interesting intricacies of getting the stages prepared for the match and then how it turned out. Okay, so stage 1 was probably the most elaborate stage of the match. We had a gravity-powered moving target that was activated by a popper, and we also had an interesting prop. If you remember back a couple episodes, we talked about at our hand-sized handgun match, we built a new prop for the Yo Homie, Is That My Briefcase stage, and it's just a wooden framework that surrounds a standard target with a hinged arm on it, so that you've got a blue gun pointed at you, and then at the start of the stage you swat the blue gun away. Well, this stage was a little more elaborate in that it had 2 arms with 2 blue guns on it, and so the technique that we discussed at the start would be wax on, wax off. You'd have to swat both of the arms away, draw your gun, and then move. It was a fairly compact stage, but there were multiple shooting positions, and I thought it was one of the better stages in the match. I shot it pretty well. That's probably one of the reasons I thought it was one of the better stages of the match. But we did require some kind of fiddling around. It was a stage that we were concerned about the gravity-powered mover passing in front of a threat target and creating a shoot-through situation. Just some little things like that. And even if you look at the diagram, you'll see that T2 is to the far right, and then T1 is a little further down range. And I think the idea was that you'd engage T1 and then back up. But actually, after we got it set up on the stage in the bay, those two targets are actually switched. I think this match booklet is like the Thursday night match booklet, not the Saturday morning match booklet. So it's got some variations from how the stages were actually shot. But as you can see, multiple shooting positions. The gravity-operated mover operated perfectly. We, again, fiddled with the weight of it to adjust the speed so that everybody could get the required number of shots off. And it was a cool stage. I really liked that one. Now, stage 2 was the first one that really caused problems. Now, as you can see in its Thursday night form, you've got 4 targets that are engaged from P1. You're sitting, this is supposed to be a movie theater. We had 3 benches, it shows 2, but we had 3 benches lined up. And if you see the procedure, it says engage T1 through T3. Well, at one time, I think the stage had been 2 rounds per target. So if you have 3 targets out in the open, that'd be 6 rounds. And then we pumped the round count up to 15 by making it 3 rounds per target. Well, now you have 3 targets in the open, times 3, it's 9 rounds. The rules don't allow more than 6 rounds in the open. So it's just kind of that disconnect between the original stage design and the kind of semi-final design. Oh, let's just add another round per target without then considering, oh, now we've got too many rounds in the open. So all we had to do was take T3 and move it behind the door. There was a wall there with a door in it. So instead of having three targets in the open and 2 behind the door, 2 targets in the open and 3 behind the door. So it's easy fix, but again, it's one of those deals where when I was looking at it, I was thinking 3, 6, okay, but then when we actually sit down and start to shoot it, well, hold it, it's not 6, it's 9. So we caught that one, got that squared away, and that was a fun stage. We had to DQ, I think, 2 people last year for sweeping themselves on the doorknob, opening the door, and we didn't DQ anybody this year, so that's thankful. I hate that. I don't, I mean, obviously it's a safety issue, but we didn't have to DQ anybody this year, so that worked out really nice. Now, stage 3, this was an interesting one. This one caused by far the most discussion. I mean, I bet before it was set up, we talked about it for a couple of hours, and then after it was set up, I'm sure we talked about it for at least another couple of hours. We came up with 3 or 4 different ways to shoot it. There was discussion that it was unsafe. How do you make it more safe? How would a physically disabled shooter be given an option of shooting it? And it all revolved around the requirement that the shooter shoot the stage from a running treadmill. And so we brought the treadmill out, set it up on the stage, and we're adjusting the speed of it so that it was kind of a comfortable pace, that people weren't jogging, people could make a comfortable walking pace. And people immediately said, oh, it's dangerous. People who aren't familiar with the treadmill, they've never been on it, they're going to have to be given some optional way of shooting the stage without the treadmill. So then we're trying to figure out, we need a way to shoot the stage that doesn't involve the treadmill, that doesn't give the person who's not using the treadmill an advantage. And so we came up with these multiple different options. Turn off the treadmill instead of having it on. Have a separate shooting box next to the treadmill. Have two shooting boxes that you must use both. Trying to come up with a way so that the person who used the treadmill wasn't at a disadvantage compared to the people who didn't use it. And it got to the point where I thought everybody was going to go home. Before it was finished being set up, that literally people were just tired of talking about it, even again after it was set up. So and then we ran into the problem that the treadmill did cause enough of an issue with shooters' ability to accurately engage the targets that for a lot of shooters, the alternate DNF scoring method, if you're familiar with that from IDPA scoring, was a better score than what most people were actually shooting. The IDPA rules, if you're in a DNF situation, let's say your gun is broken, you're unable to complete the course of fire, the two methods by which you're scored are take your actual score, including all the penalties and whatnot, and then the alternate scoring method is 3 seconds times the minimum number of rounds required. So what we were finding is that 3 times the minimum number of rounds required, I think, is 36 seconds, something like that, 42 seconds. But we found that people who were actually shooting the stage were taking longer than that to shoot it. And you can't do that. I mean, you've got to have a situation where the DNF penalty is actually a, I mean, the DNF penalty is a penalty. I mean, you can't have a situation where the alternate scoring is a better score than what people are actually shooting, or you might be surprised how many broken guns and whatnot you come up with. So we altered the round count. We had threat targets with black hardcover on them that we made full targets, and we got to the point where after, you know, like an expert, a master, and a marksman had shot it, everybody seemed to be able to get through it on the treadmill with a decent score. Now, my score sucked. I shot this stage 2 or 3 times. The treadmill was running at the same speed each time, but with different target arrays, different target locations, removing the hard cover to make the shots easier, reducing the number of penalties to help, you know, cut down the difference between actual scores and the DNF scores. And it got to the point where I still didn't shoot it well. Like, for instance, the time that I shot it with the hardcover on the targets. I mean, some of the targets were, you know, the cross bandoliers style where the whole lower half almost of the target is black. The targets where you have a black on either side of the head, so the outer you know, inch on either side of the DownZero zone is non-scoring. And when I shot the stage with that hard cover on the targets, my score was actually better than when I shot it with fully exposed targets. So it's just one of those things where I think it was like it was a total crapshoot. If I shot it 5 times, 5 different ways, I don't know that how hard or easy it was would have really had any effect on my score. But what did happen is you had people whose score on that stage was 20 or 30 or 40 seconds difference. And I don't mean the difference between a master and a marksman. I think Nils won the stage in 10 seconds down 0, a 16-round stage, 10 seconds down 0. From the treadmill. I think my time was 30 seconds down 10 or something like that, including 2 or 3, you know, reloads, you know, on the treadmill. So it's one of those stages that I think, in retrospect, it was cool. I was really surprised how many people used the treadmill, considering the kind of the difficulty, the sense that it was dangerous, people might fall off. I was surprised at how many people chose to use the treadmill, how little problem we had with the tread. There was, again, some discussion about the heavier you are, the slower the treadmill's running. You know, I mean, there was just, it was never, nobody ever really seemed to be happy with it. But the overriding conclusion seemed to be, wow, what a cool stage, you know, and I guess that's worth something, you know. So it did turn out to be a fun stage. I think the treadmill, which seemed initially like a gimmick, you know, people were saying, if you're supposed to be walking through the park, which I think is the name of the stage, Stroll in the Park or something, why don't you just walk through the park instead of walking on a treadmill? You know, this isn't a stroll through the gym, it's a stroll through the park, and there's all kinds of arguments like that. But anyway, the treadmill was a kind of a cool prop. Almost everybody used it, and I didn't hear anybody really complaining about it. Almost all the comments were, hey, that's really cool, man. So it was a cool stage. Turned out to be a cool stage. Stage 4 was the Walther pickup gun stage. And it was a pretty simple deal. We wanted to, because we had to handle two guns, reloading the pickup gun, putting it in a box. We wanted to make it a short, quick stage in terms of shooting, because we knew the additional gun handling and gun manipulation was going to slow things down a bit. I think how it finally turned out is the SO at the end of the stage would pick up the gun and holster it, the Walther pistol that is, and holster it, so that then everybody could go around and tape and score, and then when everybody was back at the start position, he'd pull out the gun, load it, and put it on the table. And so that kind of minimized the extra gun handling to just a few seconds. But it was a cool stage. You'd start with your gun in the briefcase, and then after you'd emptied your gun on T1 through T3, there was a drawer in the table. Pull the drawer out, pull out the Walther, and it was unloaded. There was a loaded mag in it, but the chamber was empty. And it was amazing the number of people, including myself, who just whipped the gun out of the drawer and click without having racked the slide. I mean, it seemed like 2 or 3 people per squad forgot to rack the slide initially. But it was just the target array was set up. It's kind of the illustration. I guess it's kind of hard to tell what the illustration is showing. The wall that's covering T4 and T5 was so that you really couldn't see those two targets while you were standing and engaging T1 through T3. Then after you put your gun down, picked up the Walther, and went to a kneeling position at P2, then you could see T4 and T5. So it was a pretty quick stage, pretty easy. Mostly to demonstrate the Walther pistol. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of deep thinking into it. It was mostly just to get the Walther pistol into action. But it was a fun stage. I enjoyed it. I mean, I like short, quick stages like that. I mean, I think that's IDPA kind of the core thinking behind a self-defense shooting sport, self-defense based shooting sport. Self-defense actions are usually quick and close, and so I like quick, close stages like that. So on to stage 5. Again, we had a couple of stages sponsored by Action Shooting International, our buddies, Sandy, T. Ron, and Robin. These stages come out of their stage booklets, stage design booklet. They pre-approved stages that they have for ASI, and just modified slightly for IDPA scoring. And it was really nice. They designed the stages, set up the stages, staffed the stages, and they usually have some cool props. It was an interesting stage shot around a car, and the cool thing, just kind of a cool little wrinkle, is at the start position, you stood holding an umbrella. And the idea is you're talking to these two people who may be threats. And so you're holding the umbrella with the handle parallel to the ground, so that the umbrella itself is shielding from view the fact that you've got your gun trained on these people that you're talking to. So at the start position, you're standing there with the umbrella in the weak hand, the gun in the strong hand, at conversational distance with T1 and T2. And then at the start, and again, because this is, rulebook version 3.2, it says while holding the umbrella, but we decided that we would drop that requirement. And so it was drop the umbrella, engage T1 and T2 while backing up to the port A, which is the rolled down window of the car. So you're shooting all the way through the car, through the driver's window, out the passenger window at T3 and T4, then you're going to a kneeling position by the rear of the car where there's a fairly elaborate port to avoid shooting up the car. If you'll notice in the photographs, I don't know if you can see it or not, the rear window got shot out of our car a couple of years ago, so we're fairly concerned now whenever we're shooting around the car that people are going to put another bullet through. So we'll usually use this corrugated plastic to create these kind of buffer zones where a bullet will pass through that and still not hit the car. If somebody, for instance, you have your gun, you're leaning out, and your sights are above the edge of the car, but the muzzle is down below the edge of the car. If you add that little piece of plastic there, that just moves you out beyond the physical part of the car, and if your muzzle is essentially on the wrong side of the your hard cover line, you're not going to put a round through the trunk. It'll just go through that plastic barrier. So port B was a low port. You had to go kneeling and engage. Actually, it does not say kneeling. It just says through the port. We decided it's another thing. We're hemming and hawing. Should we call it low cover? And ultimately, we just made a physical port that extended out. You had to shoot under it, but there was no requirement that you go kneeling. Then you would move over. This was the one part of the match where there were 2 stages in the same bay. Move over to stage 6, and this is now like a camping scenario where you're fueling your chainsaw when I think it's meth dealers, meth makers come along. And so to start the action, you throw the gas can in the direction of the fire pit. There's a fire pit there on the ground, and to determine whether you had thrown it at the fire pit or not, the gas can had to pass beyond this fault line, and as long as the can went beyond the fault line, that was sufficient to fulfill the requirement of throwing it at the fire pit. And then you engage your targets. Pretty easy, but still fun. Pretty simple, but fun. I like these short little stages. Then on to stage 7. This is a home invasion stage. It involved another mover. This one, the first one on stage 1 was gravity activated. This one used the weight and pulley system to power it. And this stage, just as an example of we call it production value. When we're designing courses of fire, even if they're fairly simple courses of fire, we like to include little elements that aren't necessarily complicated or whatever, but they just kind of add to the effect. And sometimes it comes down to, for instance, if you have a stage that's set inside your house, having a lamp sitting there, having a picture hanging on the wall. It doesn't change the shooting challenge at all, but it just kind of fleshes out the stage and gives it a little more sense of I'm not in a chair sitting on a dirt range floor in Renton. I'm in my living room because I've got my TV remote in my hand and there's actually a TV there. And so we always try to do just little things like that because we have the time and the manpower usually to do it at the state match. And on this stage, this wall, after you get up from the initial start position and move to what is marked as P1 on the stage, the way the stage was originally designed, it was just two parallel walls with a gap in between them. And I thought, you're supposed to be in your house. I mean, it says, I want to go to bed. You're getting ready to go to bed. And so I said, well, let's just make these, instead of just 2 parallel walls with essentially a port in between them, let's make them L-shaped walls so that it looks like you're looking down the hallway of your house. And here's these invaders that are in your home, just to kind of, increase that, just a little bit of an increase in realism. It doesn't take a ton of effort, but the simplest stage in the world can be fleshed out and made to look a lot more impressive just with some little touches like that. So, for instance, on this stage, you put a tablecloth on the table. Just little things like that. It just kind of makes a simple stage more interesting. On to stage 8, dinner party. Now, this is an interesting. The diagram will probably give you a headache if you look at it. We had somebody come in and essentially survey all of the shooting bays at the range, and we keep that in a file at our website. And as you can see, it's got all the dimensions for the width and the depth. These dark circles up at the top with little arrows indicating they're about 2 feet in diameter. Those are trees. And then this large dark gray circle in the lower right corner, that's an outcropping of trees surrounded by some bushes. And so when you're designing and setting up your stages, those are really nice to have, those visual indicators of, okay, the wall's got to go here because there's a tree there. And I can't put the target here because, that's where the concrete wall is, and your rounds are going to go into the wall if I put the target too far closer to the wall. But for actually inclusion in the in the match booklet, it creates kind kind of a messy image, and then the proportions of it have been changed to fit in here, so it looks kind of weird. But essentially, this is one of our most expansive bays that we have in terms of width, but we do have to work around these trees and whatnot. And it's pretty standard. You start seated at the table, jump up, and again, since it's a dinner party, there's cool things you can do that, again, have nothing really to do with the shooting challenge, but just kind of dress the stage up. You know, put some plates of hors d'oeuvres on the table, put some streamers on the wall because it's a party, you know, just stuff like that. So I think that's fun. It's a cool stage, fairly complicated to set up with the walls and whatnot, but good fun stage we had shot before. So this one is one that had been thoroughly vetted, and we knew it was going to work, and it did. We didn't have any issues with it. And I was actually, the last couple of years, I've kind of served as a technical advisor for the match director. And this year, one of the safety officers had to leave for some reason. So on Sunday, I actually got to hold a timer and work as a real safety officer. And this was the stage that I got to work. And it was fun. I had a good time. I mean, I hadn't worked the state match with a timer in my hand for 3 or 4 years. So it was cool. I had a good time. Stage 9. Now this is kind of funny, again showing how this is the Thursday night match booklet and not the Saturday morning match booklet. The scenario is for a completely different stage. The scenario, I think, is for the stage that had originally been slotted into this bay, but it then was replaced by this end of days, which is kind of it's not really a zombie apocalypse, but it's, you start, even though the scenario here says something about the diamond brokerage firm and a diamond robbery, the actual stage setting was in a bunker. So we built this thing with the roof on the bunker at about 5.5 feet high, and then the ports were long and narrow, or wide and shallow. How do you describe that? Like a gun port, not like a window. So you'd start inside the bunker, work your way around these windows, and then you come out to what looks like a ladder on the diagram is the wobbly bridge or wiggly bridge. And a few years ago at the state match, we had a stage that had 3 or 4 of these wobbly bridges, which are a platform that are suspended on chains from a framework so that as you're walking on them, they move around. I don't really like them, but because we have 3 or 4 of them at the range, they always seem to find their way into the stages to represent various things. And in this case, because it's this kind of end of days doomsday scenario, the wobbly bridge simulates an earthquake. So after you fought your way out of your shelter, your bomb shelter, you come out and there's an earthquake. So you have to work your way down the wobbly bridge and then engage the remaining targets from outside. And it, fairly simple stage, but the wobbly bridge does add some, production value. It's not just a walk from here to there. It's not just a walk in the park. You've got to negotiate the wobbly bridge, and so it does add some production value to what is really, a fairly simple stage. Stage 10. Now this is a stage that we'd run before as I think a 7-shot kind of standard exercise, and it's based on an actual historical event. Right in the IDPA rule book, it says stages are supposed to be realistic, something that could really happen. Well, what's more realistic than something that actually did happen? And in this case, it's part of the Medal of Honor engagement of Sergeant York, then Corporal York, in World War I. And so, as the story goes, if you've ever read his book or seen the movie, it's a pretty good movie with Gary Cooper as Sergeant York. He explains that when he's hunting turkeys, I think, he would shoot the one that's furthest away so that the ones that were closer to him wouldn't realize that he was picking them off. I mean, if he started with the nearest one, his buddies would say, hey, he got Fred, hey, he got Bob, and the rest of them might take off. So his theory is if I shoot the ones that are in the back, they won't notice, and I'll be able to get all of them before they fly away. And that scene in the movie where he's explaining, Gary Cooper as Sergeant York, that sets up the scene later where I think it turns out he either killed or captured like 230 enemy soldiers or something like that. And there's this one scene where when he runs his rifle dry, my understanding of the historical story is 7 German soldiers leapt up and start running towards him with their rifles. So he draws his pistol, and thinking back to his theory about shooting turkeys, instead of shooting the nearest German first, he shoots the most distant one first. Shoots essentially in reverse tactical priority. And so we've set this stage up before with just 6 or 7 targets, but we decided to call this one Sergeant York times 2 because there were 12 targets in this V pattern, and it was just put 1 round on each target. So it's just a fairly simple challenge, but a lot of transitions because you had 12 targets. So a lot of target transitions, and other than that, nothing extremely remarkable. But it's kind of a fun stage, and I enjoy it, and it's, we'll probably do it again someday. Stage 11. Now, this is an interesting stage that, again, version 3.2 in the match booklet doesn't exactly look like what we shot on Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. And I can't remember what the original scenario was, but the wiggly bridge in this case was to represent a boat. And so it's like the swaying of the boat is what the wiggly bridge is, unlike the other stage where it was a earthquake. And you've got the way the bay is set up. The main surface of the bay is elevated relative to the position where this first array of targets is located. So you've got a wide, flat shooting area, and there's what amounts to a ditch at the edge, and then the berm comes up behind the ditch, so you can lay these targets back against the berm, and they're actually below, kind of below your waist level. And I can't remember if it was a pirate attack or something, was the original scenario. And it just wasn't working for some reason, and I just said, Sharknado. That'll be the theme. If you're familiar with Sharknado, I'm going to bore you with this. If you don't know what the heck Sharknado is, it's a series of these campy sort of sci-fi movies where these tornadoes come up in coastal areas, and the tornado picks up sharks out of the ocean and then deposits them in the city, in the country. And for some reason, the sharks not only can swim, but they can fly, And so if you can imagine these highly mobile sharks attacking people on land and sea, propelled by these winds from the tornado, that's Sharknado. And so the stage became Sharknado. You're on the wiggly bridge, shooting downward as if into the water from a boat. But then, of course, the tornado comes up, and now the sharks are on land, and it's kind of a slightly implausible scenario, but the shooting challenge remains. I mean, you're shooting at threats that are in the water, threats that are on the land, and with this kind of fanciful Sharknado scenario. But it was a fun stage. Again, a way to introduce the wobbly bridge into yet another stage. But it required uprange movement. I was surprised at the consternation amongst the staff. After we'd had it set up, I'd walked through it 2 or 3 or 8 times and decided, yeah, the targets are in the right place. I like the way the walls are angled. This shows a series of walls that are running in a single direction with ports in it. What we did instead was rotate those walls 90 degrees, so as you moved uprange and went beyond each wall, it would reveal another array of targets. And after I'd set it up and decided, oh yeah, I like this. This is done. Check that off. Then like 2 hours later, these guys come along and say, oh, hey, we completely redesigned that stage to run in the other direction, and we moved the walls and pulled the wobbly bridge. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. And I go out there and look at it, and I just thought, no, I was really happy with it the way I had it set up before. So we restored it back to starting on the wobbly bridge, moving uprange to get the last few targets. I think we did have a DQ there, but that's potential on any stage. Then to stage 12. This was kind of an interesting one that I didn't initially approve of. As you can see, P2 is P1 is where the shooter starts, where they can't see essentially any of the targets. There's a wall between them and all the threats. So when they arrive at P2, that'll kind of be their first look at the array downrange. And as you can see, that the wall that's arranged in the uprange downrange has orientation that has a port through the middle of it. The purpose of that wall is to allow you to engage T1 from P2. So as you arrive at P2, the first target you engage is T1, and then engage T2, T3, and move to P3. Well, the first target you see from P3 is also T1. Now, normally, when we've designed stages where you're allowed to re-engage targets, the assumption or the reality is that it's a target that you've kind of left behind. You've gone to a certain shooting position, you moved on to the next position, and now that target is something that's in the opposite direction of where you're going, and you're only going to shoot it again if you decide, hey, I have a miss on that, so I'm going to go back to it. But on this stage, T1 it reminded me of a memory stage, which is fairly common in USPSA, but I have very little experience with it in IDPA, where the same target is visible from more than one place. And initially I didn't like it. And I just said, normally when we set these stages up, the targets are visible only from the place from which you're expected to engage it. And then whether you can engage it or not, re-engage it from a different position, it will be based solely on is it still downrange from you, is it safe to do so, etc., etc. But in this case, T1 was located with the specific intent that it be engaged again if you want to, or that you remember that that's a target that you've already engaged so you don't engage it again. But I kind of bought into it after a while. I go, okay, that's all right. And then AT1 is not visible from P3. You activate it from P3 by knocking down the popper, but the angle of that wall that's right behind T5 is such that you don't see AT1, that's a swinger, until you start moving towards P4. And so that's a surprise target, surprise appearing target, and that wall behind T5 is a vision barrier. And then you arrive at P4 and engage T6 and T7 through the port. And it was kind of interesting. My job, and we'll kind of come back to this, my job for this match was as range master. And so part of my responsibility is to make sure that the stages comply with the rules. Now on this stage, it's a fairly large stage, as you can see from the pictures. There's quite a bit of movement. And I had to move P1 considerably closer to P2, because if P1 had remained where it was, the total movement on the stage would have been closer to 50 feet. And a maximum allowable movement is 45 feet. So I had to move P1 a little bit closer to P2 to get that total distance down to 45 feet. But that's exactly the kind of thing that we're looking for when the super squad is shooting. And of course it should be taken care of in advance. But I'm kind of just setting up the story to come later. But I carefully measured that out to make sure it was no more than 45 feet. Then we get to stage 13. Now this is long-range standards. Now the rule book for 2015 made some changes to the what you're allowed to do with long-range stages. And by long range, more than 25 yards or 25 or more yards. And on this particular stage, it was a standards type stage, 3 targets engaged at what I had intended to be about 25 yards. We'd set the stage up on a skeet range that did not have a normal backstop. It's just kind of a long slope that is quite high at the back because it is the shotgun range. It's the tallest berm in on the range, but it's not a sharp vertical surface like we have in our shooting bays. It's just more of a long slope. And there was the decision that we should at least try to slow down the bullets a little bit by putting some hay bales behind them. Not thinking the hay bales would stop the bullets, but just reduce the likelihood of anything skipping over the top of this 30-foot high berm. And we set them up. I stood on while we would be shooting on the skeet range, the trap range would be active. And so, of course, on the trap range, they're swinging through a arc kind of like this as targets are coming out, at different angles. So I stood on the rightmost position on the trap range and kind of sighted along and decided, okay, as long as we're no further downrange than this, we're okay. So I walked back over to the skeet range, and we had put up some particle board barricades kind of along the space between the trap and the skeet range. And I just said, push this back as far as you can, consistent with people downrange not being out where they're going to be exposed to the shotgun, active shotgun ranges next door. And it looked fine to me. I went out there and looked at it and stood and looked at it and thought it was great. And then, as it turns out, it was too far. The rules say you can require no more than 6 rounds at a distance of more than 25 yards. This was a 9-round stage, and as it turns out, after I paced it off, essentially after the match was over, it was 28 yards. So we had to throw the stage out. And that created a little bit of issue after the match, but it was resolved. The stage was illegal. It was thrown out. The match results were not revealed until after they'd been corrected. There was no skullduggery or anything going on there. But the stage was thrown out because it was illegal. It's my fault because I didn't measure it prior to the match. I just told the guys push it as far back as will fit, and then didn't go back and confirm that as far back as will fit was that wasn't more than 25 yards. So live and learn. It was a fun stage anyway. 9 rounds at 28 yards, as it turns out. But it was a good match. I actually thought we had some. Back to the stages not being especially elaborate. I kind of enjoyed that. I'm more of a fan of kind of simple challenges. You can make a stage challenging without making it complicated. And we've had some stages in the past where there was a little bit of grumbling about being too complicated, not being obvious where the next shooting position is, and so just kind of throttling it back a little bit, not more than 1 activating target per stage. I just thought it was a good time. The stages were really good, sound stages, and I didn't hear anybody complaining. We had a great prize table. Big thanks. I don't want to, if I start naming people, I'll of course then leave people out. But I mean, our major sponsors, big sponsors, Blade Tech and Springfield Armory came through as they always do, and we're really happy with that. But then other sponsors, for instance, I took off the prize table a bottle of moonshine. Microbreweries have been big in the Seattle area for 30 years now, and over the last 10 years or so, micro distilleries have really started to pop up. And so we have a few local distilleries, and 2 Bar Spirits came through. I'm just going to plug them because I got their prize. And the moonshine is pretty good. I'm not a huge booze drinker, but little sip of moonshine every couple of days doesn't hurt any. So thank your sponsors. If you shot our match, drop a line. If you shot any match and you had a prize table, call your sponsors, write your sponsors, email your sponsors. Let them know you appreciate their sponsorship, and of course, buy their products. It's a two-way street. If they make good stuff, show your appreciation by buying it. So anyway, that's another Washington State Championship in the books. Hope you enjoyed the little review, and stay safe at the range. Have a good time, and we'll see you later.